lovelies, and welcome back to Seriously Now. I'm Lex Carline, and I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. And I know I said I'd be back next week, but surprise! 2 episodes this week for you, just as a way of saying we're back. I'm really sorry for messing you guys around again, but have an extra one. So, autumn is well and truly kicking in here in Pembrokeshire. The leaves are changing colour, it's beautiful. But I am going to miss the heat, I'm not going to lie. Well, what little bit of summer we supposedly had anyway. So I've noticed that we actually have some more lovelies joining us, so thank you very much. Hello, come on in, we don't bite unless you want us to. And thank you to those of you who have been spreading the Seriously Now word. Please carry on liking, subscribing, sharing, all that wonderful stuff. Thank you very much. Anyway, I just got to itch my head, hang on. Oh! So this week, we're going to go back to the 1970s to West Coast America. And we're going to talk about Father Yod and the Sauce family. Anybody come across them before? Well, let's jump in, shall we? So California in the 1970s was a hub of hippie culture. Peace, love, recreational drugs, lots of sex. It also saw the creation of the Sauce family and their leader, Father Yod. But who was Father Yod? Born Edward James Baker in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1922, his father was a detective from Chicago, which is kind of cool, who was actually killed by mobsters ordered by Al Capone's rival, Roger Toohey. So that's a whole nother true crime story all of its own. Yod was said to have lived a colourful life. He earned the Silver Star Medal for heroism in the US Marines in World War II, where he actually shot down 13 Japanese fighter planes. So, well earned. Although, don't condone violence, but war is a whole stupid game. Anyway, Yod was also an expert in judo and jiu-jitsu, and in 1948 he won the Judo World Championships in Cincinnati. Nutrition and exercise, that sort of lifestyle, was very, very important to him, and he actually graduated the Swedish School of Massage in Chicago. Love a good massage, how about you? He moved to Los Angeles, or good old LA. I'm not going to try and do a Yankee accent, American accent, sorry, Californian accent, because it's not, I would just offend a lot of people. But yes, he moved there in the 1950s, and that's where he married his second wife, Elaine, and he was a leather goods worker. And he actually had a shop in his own house in Topanga Canyon. Now, in 1955, things took a bit of a sideways turn when Yod actually killed a neighbour of his with a jiu-jitsu punch. I can't say that very well. Jiu-jitsu punch to the throat. Ouch. And the fight was actually over the neighbour's pit bull. And I'm going to jump in straight away and say it's not the breed, it's the human. There's no such thing as a bad breed, so we can stick 2 fingers royally up to the UK ban on XL bullies. Anyway, back to the story. Yod was actually acquitted for this, and it was classed as a justifiable homicide. Interesting. So in the 1960s, Father Yod ran 3 restaurants, fingers in lots of pies, and this was all whilst experimenting with LSD, which is a hallucinogenic, and was again very big around the hippie era, and still quite popular today. Now, he also, interestingly, started auditioning for stunt work in movies, even auditioning for Tarzan, but sadly this was not to be. So he began drinking heavily and cheating on Elaine regularly. Sounds like a wonderful creature so far, doesn't he? Now, in January of 1963, Father Yod, who was known by his birth name still at this point, began an affair with actress Jean Ingram. She was also married. What is it with people? If you want to sleep with someone else, leave the people you're with, for God's sake. Unless you've got an agreement, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But otherwise, just get out. Save all the pain. Or save even more pain. I don't get it. Anyway, Jean's husband was Robert Ingram, and he was an Orange County hotelier and builder. So he was very, very wealthy himself. On the 29th of January 1963, so the end of the same month that the affair began, Mr. Ingram, the jealous husband, came to Yod's apartment with a gun because he'd discovered the affair, and obviously Yod was the one that needed to pay, not his cheating wife. But hey-ho. So this was actually over one of the restaurants that Yod ran on Sunset Strip. I'm doing well already with my words. Sunset Strip, and it was called the Aware Inn. Now the two men fought, and unfortunately for Mr. Ingram, Yod killed him. Again, using two jiu-jitsu chops to the neck, and then shot him in the head with his own gun. Nice. So in July of 1963, Father Yod was sentenced to between 1 and 10 years for manslaughter. He barely served any time, surprise, surprise, and he was free again by the mid-60s. He registered his fists as lethal weapons, which I find quite amusing, but I suppose they are. But he was once again doing well in the restaurant business. Until Father Yod embezzled money from one of the restaurants that he co-owned and bought himself, of all things, a purple Rolls Royce. I mean, I'm all for a nice car, but hitting me microphone, but what a moron. So, unsurprisingly, the partners found out and fired him. Bye! It's also claimed that he robbed between 2 and 11 banks. There's a bit of a difference between 2 and 11. So, yeah, bank robber for the resume as well. Now, Yod had begun to embrace Eastern religions and yoga, and he himself was a disciple of the Kundalini yoga. This inspired him to become a spiritual leader, and his philosophy derived from teachings of his former mentor Yogi Bhajan and texts by Eugene Fersen and Jiddu Krishnamurti, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, and it was also blended with Eastern religion and Western Stoicism. In April 1969, he opened the Source restaurant on Sunset Strip, and it was hailed as one of the world's first health food restaurants. So this was a real turning point in organic, healthy eating. I say it healthy loosely because a lot of the healthy food that we see today is actually pumped full of sugar and all sorts of rubbish things and then labelled as, yeah, it's organic, it's good for you. But this was genuine, good, healthy food. And in the restaurant, the organic vegetarian dishes were served by young white-robed hippies. Now get this. Some of the regulars at the Source restaurant were John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Marlon Brandon, Joni Mitchell, and Warren Beatty. So, knocking stuff over, sorry guys. But yeah, so pretty popular. And it even featured in Woody Allen's classic Annie Hall, where he mockingly ordered alfalfa sprouts and mashed yeast. At its peak, the restaurant reportedly took around $300,000 a month, or $10,000 a day, which would be around about $2.4 million a month today. So it did all right. So, the restaurant's successful, and in the early 1970s, this actually became the base for the Source family. It was a cult, although they probably wouldn't have called it that. And they ended up with about 150 in-house followers, generally young, impressionable people looking for a sense of purpose and community. So many of us looking for that today. Can't fault wanting purpose and community, really. So it became a utopian cult in the Hollywood Hills, and it sounds fancy. Not quite as fancy as that, given that although it was a mansion, the house they shared only had 3 bedrooms. It was named the Mother House, and when Father Yod coined his spiritual leader name, he promoted healthy eating, yoga, meditation, and other lifestyles new to America at the time. The family had a regimented diet and took part in many chanting rituals. Yod would instruct the family members in the arts of meditation, smoking the sacred herb. Can you guess what that is? Yep, some good old marijuana. Yes, please. He also instructed them in sex and familial love. Now, all in all, doesn't sound too heinous when you just look at the surface, does it? No. I mean, meditation, smoking some weed, having some good sex, loving your family. Can't see much wrong with that. But yeah, we'll carry on down our journey, shall we? Now, the family used the surname Aquarian to identify themselves as family members. Their first names were also changed, and the word "the" was used as a middle name. So some examples are Isis the Aquarian, or Octavius, Gin, Electricity, and Sunflower the Aquarian. And this name was chosen at that time for the then current or upcoming, depending on who you ask, astrological period, the Age of Aquarius. Now, I can just hear the song by Fifth Dimension in my head. You know, the Age of Aquarius. Sorry, no more singing. The Source family believed that they were part of a tradition of white magic from as far back as the Renaissance period. Okay? Music was a central aspect of family lifestyle, and in 1973 they formed their house band, which played extreme psychedelic rock, originally known as Father Yod and the Spirit of 76, later as Yo Ha Wah 13. They recorded, get this, more than 60 albums in 1973 and 74. That is a lot. And they described it as music for the dawning of a new age. But unfortunately, they would be rejected by every major record label that they approached, so they did self-press 9 LPs, which they then sold from the restaurant. Now, Isis Aquarian, who is the family's archivist and is still very much alive today and in her 80s, believes, and still believes, that Father Yod's teachings were ahead of his time. She says, "He taught us there was a whole new world ahead of us, a reset for the betterment of humanity and the planet. We thought it would happen back then, 50 years ago. But she says she sees it happening in the world now because we've all been brought together because of COVID." So this interview is from a couple of years ago. But she also thinks that we're finally reaching for the betterment of others. Kindness is not just a buzzword anymore. Now, if we're talking about the average Joes, you know, all of us normal people, maybe. If we're talking about the powers that be, yeah, I can't say I agree with you there, because they are definitely working for themselves, not us. One of the main teachings that ISIS still carries and basically lives by, that Father Yod said, was, do what you want, just be kind. Jin, who was the band's guitarist, met Father Yod when he was just 23, and he was looking for community rather than a leader. He left his first meeting not really feeling it, disliked the use of sheepskins for meditations, which, you know, doesn't seem vegetarian friendly. And so he travelled for another year, returning in 1972, and then joined the family in the October. Jin said that Father Yod was so accomplished in so many ways and was so willing to share his every success and knowledge with us. That kind of gift in a young, seeking person's life. I mean, you can only imagine the influence, he recalls, which, yes, young, impressionable people, I imagine Yod was like a beacon of light for them. He says it was literally like meeting God, the Father, or God, the Brother, however you wish to see it. That's quite a statement. Octavius Aquarian learned of the family through a friend, and so he went to check it out and never left. And he was also a musician, drawn to the community side of the family. Now, there are some emails from Octavius where he explains that it was more about what they were into in those days. Father Yod was first and foremost a father figure to all the people who clearly had a need for an example in their lives. And Isis Aquarian says of these celebrity diners, "We felt more famous than they were. They came to eat at the Source because it was the in place to be. We were clean, positive, happy people, and the whole thing put you in a different state of mind, a different frequency. When you stepped onto the Source patio, everybody felt it. It was a whole other world." Now, it may have been, but this was also the time where there were lots of recreational drugs, so that may have influenced. I don't know, wasn't there, can't say, but just pondering. Isis herself joined the family in 1972, and she was one of Father Yod's 14 wives. And from the very beginning, she created and maintained scrapbooks recording Yod's teachings and the group activities. So she herself gave herself, that's some wonderful English. But anyway, yeah, she gave herself the job of archiving everything. And she still does that to this day. So fair play to her. Everyone loves a good scrapbook, don't we? Whether we just want to look at it or make it. We love a scrapbook. As I said, Isis is now in her 80s, and she says of the family, "We were daring, we were beautiful, we were the darlings of LA," which is quite the statement. Now, her original name was Charlene Peters, and she was a former beauty queen and White House aide who was at the time engaged to Ron Raffaelli, and he was a rock and roll photographer, famous for pictures of Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, The Doors. Kind of quite a cool dude. So he was commissioned to shoot the ad campaign for musical Jesus Christ Superstar. Isis headed off to the Source Cafe to look for more suitable models amongst the bearded hippie staff, and she had actually known Father Yod through his first wife, Dora. And he had changed so much that she didn't recognise him when she saw him on the patio. She said he came out looking like Moses. He was no longer Jim. It was an instant connection. When we met, I remember making commitments to each other before incarnating into our present lives. I knew this was our time. Quite romantic, really. Now, it took Isis just 2 days to leave her old life behind. 2 days. She went back to the studio, got her cameras, and told Ron that she was leaving, originally hoping, as I imagine many of them did, that he would come with her. He wanted nothing to do with it. Nope, no cult, nope, not for me, thank you. And he thought that Isis would return in a matter of weeks. How wrong he was, because she never went back. Isis said that the mother house was amazing. A beautiful 3-story mansion with a huge swimming pool, makes up for the lack of bedrooms, I suppose. And there were 60 or 70 people, either naked or in flowing robes, just running about. Like we were in another era, another age. Now, the family believed that they, as a group, lived many lives together, and they were just being brought back in this one for their next journey. And they actually spent time revisiting past incarnations under Yod's instruction. And past life regression, and which past life regression is definitely something I'm interested in. Has anybody done it? Anybody had a go? Anybody learnt anything interesting about themselves? Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Now, Isis says that we were getting metaphysical teachings and living a metaphysical life. We went through periods of experiencing life as American Indians or Egyptians, which is really cool. And he allowed us to really delve into those incarnations. We got to reconnect with all of that. It just became normal. Now, obviously, everyone's definition of normal is different, but I am really, really intrigued by this revisiting past lives, because do we really only get one? Or do we keep going until we get it right and then we reach enlightenment, evolve, something? Yeah, all the questions that we want to know that we probably won't ever get answered until we get there. Now, naturally, the family's unconventional way of living attracted its fair share of haters. They were often compared to the Manson family back then, and Octavius says that the fear of unknown is usually a factor. But despite the comparison, thankfully, the Source family didn't follow the Mansons down the same murderous route. Woo! Isis wasn't fazed by the cult connection at all. In fact, she said that she didn't really have an issue with it. To her, cult is just one's culture, a way of life or belief. Charles Manson brought that term to wider attention because the press needed a buzzword when he came into the picture, and then that ruined it for everybody. Can't say I disagree with her on that one. Charles Manson and his troupe did kind of bastardize the word cult, didn't they? Because we only ever seem to think of cults as a bad thing because of the way they've been presented in the press. Maybe she's right. Father Yod liked to have tantric sex. I mean, hey, each to their own. But the problem is that he liked young women. Generally, well, sorry, not generally, but often underage. And when it looked like he was going to be in trouble because the police had been alerted, he took many of them as his wives, simultaneously marrying 13 of them. Yeah, and his former wife, Robin, called him, and this is one of the 14, called him a dirty old man on a lust trip. Now it doesn't sound so appealing, does it? Yeah, I wouldn't want to be one of the wives. No. Gin Aquarian states that some of the complaints about the family actually came from inside the closed doors. And as you can imagine, with nearly 150 people at this point crammed into 3 bedrooms, the living conditions weren't ideal, so the family sold the restaurant and decided to move to Hawaii in late 1974. I can see the appeal with Hawaii. Jin says that he remembers it being a bit like a military campaign. He says that Father had to be so resourceful, clever and wise because we didn't have as much money available without the restaurant income, and we didn't have employment until we were settled and created or found jobs to keep 144 mouths fed and bodies sheltered. And I imagine that's quite a struggle. It's bad enough these days just trying to do the same with a normal-sized family, never mind that amount. Sadly, on the 25th of August 1975, tragedy would strike the family. Father Yod decided to try hang gliding off a 400-metre or 1,300-foot cliff at Makapu Point in Oahu. He had no prior experience, so obviously it was an absolutely brilliant idea. Yod would crash land on the beach below, and sadly he then died a few days later from internal injuries. Not to speak ill of the dead, but what did he really expect? Really? Now, even faced with this tragedy, Octavius and Jin managed to put a positive spin on things. And to Octavius, he says, to this day, I felt like he was calling the unseen world's bluff. Could well have been. So would you say he called it and won or called it and lost? Genuinely curious here. Now, Jin said that it was a shock to them. Oh, clippy clappy. Sorry. That it was a shock to them all, but perhaps subconsciously expected. He said that Father Yod often mentioned leaving this plane to serve his children less fettered in the next dimension. Okay. The family would try to stay together, but without Father Yod to guide them or the restaurant to fund them, because remember that was a whopping income, wasn't it? The family split in 1977, just 2 years after Yod's tragic demise. Which is kind of sad, because other than the underage sex stuff, the rest of it, the family, the community, the past lives, the meditation, sounds really wholesome and wonderful, and we'll just put CD Yod in his box. But yeah. Now, hitting the streets and fields in Hawaii, Jin says that many of them left without means, and they were also in a state of shock after living communally for 6 or 7 years. I imagine it would have been, shock is probably an understatement. And Octavius himself said that it actually took him a couple of years to enter back into traditional society. And Jin said that coming back into the system they'd left behind was brutal for most. I can only begin to imagine, but yeah. And even those, if you were lucky enough that you had rich families to head back to, you know what they're going to say? Yep, we told you so. And you would be expected to eat some serious humble pie, which I'm sure we've all been there for one reason or another. Maybe not running off and joining a cult, but either way, humble pie sucks. Sometimes necessary, always sucky. Even with the eventual split, neither Octavius, Jin or Isis regret their time with the family. Jin looks back with gratitude and feels that it was more of a blessing than a curse as a whole. He says he learned a lot, achieved a lot, and saw how it prepared him to offer a lot to those who have been born generations after and feel an affinity with the family. There are members of the original family who clearly feel the same as Octavius, Jin, and Isis, with most claiming that the experience was transformative and largely a positive one. So that's kind of awesome. We've got some positive cult stories rather than doom and gloom and murder and kool-aid. We'll cover that one another time. If you know, you know. Now, I think it's pronounced Zarathustra, Aquarian, said that day one was biblical around Father Yod. Again, quite the statement. And with his wife Amy and daughter Alea, or Alia, they still follow the tenets of the family and hold to its beliefs. So the Source family, although separate, does live on. And thanks to Isis's scrapbooking skills and also the acclaimed documentary The Source Family, which was released in 2012, the family's legacy prevails. Now, with the world feeling like such an isolated, lonely place and people returning to the commune-based style of living, could we see a resurgence of families like The Source? And would you be inclined to join one? Apart from the seedy many wives bit, I think I'd love it. Back to simple living. Okay, yes, I'd still like some of my technological perks, but yeah, we all grow our own, we barter with food, everybody pitches in together. That sense of community has been lost, and I think that is so much of what is wrong with the world, besides money-grabbing politicians and certain elite families. But again, more stuff for another day. Soapbox is safely tucked under the table this week. But yeah, it's like they say when you have a child, it takes a village to raise the child. We need to rebuild the villages. We don't all have to do it alone, and we shouldn't. And on that note, lovelies, if you made it to the end, thank you so very much. You know I love you. Next week, given that it is spooky season, we will be talking about the witch Hannah Cranner. That's a good one. It's a doozy. She's, I got a lot of time for Hannah Cranner. Bad ass. Or sassy ass. Anyway, tune in to find out more about Hannah next week. So, if you could like, share, subscribe, and all that funky jazz, tell everybody. Spread the word. I would be eternally grateful. So thank you very much in advance. And until next week, lovelies, stay safe, stay free, and stay weird. Bye-bye.